I wasn't expecting anyone to answer the door. Honestly, I half figured my friend would forget I was even coming over, or that I'd end up standing awkwardly on the porch for 5 minutes, imagining reasons to turn around. But when the door swung open, it wasn't him. It was her, his sister, and she was smiling. Not the polite, "Oh, hello" kind of smile, but the kind that lingered just long enough to make me forget what I'd come for. "I was hoping it was you," she said. Her voice was calm, confident, and something about the way she tilted her head made it feel like a secret just between the two of us. I blinked, caught somewhere between disbelief and that strange, startled warmth that travels straight to your chest. I managed a weak, hey, because suddenly all my rehearsed small talk evaporated. I hadn't seen her in years. Not in the sense that I ever really knew her, but enough that she left a quiet impression the last time we met. Sharp, clever, and entirely unbothered by whatever expectations anyone else might have had. Now, standing in the threshold of the old repair shop my friend rented out in the corner of town, she seemed impossibly composed, like she could hold the whole room in her hands and still make it feel like she was noticing just me. The repair shop smelled faintly of motor oil and old coffee, a sharp contrast to her subtle perfume, something floral but not overpowering, just enough to make my senses catch. She moved aside to let me in, brushing past my shoulder with a light, casual grace that somehow set my nerves on edge. We didn't talk for long. I trailed behind her, feeling ridiculous as I balanced the awkwardness of wanting to ask a dozen questions and not wanting to seem intrusive. She glanced at me from the corner of her eye, an expression that was half amusement, half curiosity. Then she paused, like she remembered something, or maybe she was testing me, and offered me a cup of coffee from a thermos on the counter. The kind of simple gesture that should have been ordinary, but with her, it felt intimate. "You like it black?" she asked. Her tone was easy, practiced, like she didn't need to hide anything, yet the way her eyes held mine made me feel exposed. I nodded. "Yeah, thanks." There was a beat of silence that stretched longer than it should have. I caught her watching me, just for a second, as if trying to measure something she couldn't name. My hands tightened around the cup without meaning to, and I had to swallow because my mouth had gone dry. I couldn't tell if it was the smell of coffee, the warm air, or her presence, probably all three, but suddenly I was hyper-aware of everything. The faint smudge of grease on the counter, the way her hair fell over one shoulder, the quiet click of her fingers against the ceramic cup. I said something, I think. Something about the shop, my friend's new project, but she barely registered the words. She was already moving toward the back, glancing over her shoulder with that same smile that had stopped me at the door. There was a spark in that look, unspoken, and I found myself following her gaze like a moth to a flame, even though I had no idea what I was expecting. As I stood there, sipping my coffee, I realized I couldn't remember a time when a single smile had left me this unsettled, simultaneously nervous, curious, and a little thrilled. Something had shifted, quietly but irrevocably, in the space between us. And just like that, I knew I was going to be thinking about it for a long time. I didn't expect to be here again, standing in the back room of her brother's repair shop, pretending I knew what I was doing with a wrench in my hand. She was at the workbench, sleeves rolled up, hair loosely pinned at the nape of her neck, and I noticed the faint crease near her eyes, like she'd been laughing or worrying just before I arrived. She didn't look up when I entered, absorbed in some tiny, meticulous task. I wondered if she knew I was watching her. "Careful with that," she said finally, without turning, voice even but carrying a subtle edge that made me hesitate. I nodded, adjusting my grip. "Right. Got it." There was a rhythm to her movements, quiet and exacting, but something fragile hid underneath it. I caught the faint tremor of her hand as she tightened a bolt, the quick exhale that followed a small sigh of frustration. She tried to mask it. Everyone always tried, but I noticed. I always noticed. She glanced up, just for a second, meeting my eyes, then quickly looked away. Her lips twitched, almost a smile, almost nothing. I felt that pull again, the same unnameable tug from the first time I saw her. It wasn't desire exactly, not yet. It was curiosity mixed with a quiet ache, like something just out of reach. "I didn't mean to snap," she said softly, voice just above a whisper. Her eyes didn't meet mine, but I felt it all the same. She was apologizing to someone who wasn't even hurt, to cover something private. "It's okay," I said, and for a moment, I wasn't pretending. I meant it. I found myself watching her hands more than anything else. The way her fingers worked delicately but confidently, the subtle bruises and small calluses that spoke of years of work, of care. She was careful with everything but herself. Then she laughed. A soft, brief laugh, the kind that warms a room without needing to fill it. And just like that, a layer of her guard slipped, almost involuntarily, revealing a glimpse of the woman I was beginning to wonder about. I moved a step closer, almost without thinking. She didn't step back, but her posture stiffened, a silent line of caution. And yet, she didn't stop me from noticing the tired curve of her shoulders, the faint shadows under her eyes, the way her chest rose in shallow, almost hesitant breaths. "Thanks," she said after a while, quieter than before, almost as if she was admitting something she didn't want me to hear. "For?" I asked, my voice catching slightly. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, eyes flitting toward mine for a single heartbeat before darting away. That small motion, that unspoken hesitation, left me holding my breath. Something unspoken passed between us, fragile but undeniable. A quiet acknowledgement that the space between us was charged and dangerous only because it was so tempting. I stayed still, unsure whether to close the gap or let it linger, and she let it linger, her glance a whisper, her smile a secret I wasn't supposed to fully understand. And I knew I'd be replaying it in my head long after I left. The rain tapped against the windows like a quiet insistence, a rhythm that matched the way my chest felt. Fast, tense, uncertain. She and I were in the small office at the repair shop, lights dim, surrounded by scattered papers and tools. I'd come to help her sort through some old invoices, but the real task was pretending not to notice how close she was. She leaned over the desk, shoulder brushing mine just barely, and I caught the faint scent of her perfume again. It wasn't overpowering, just there, like a whisper of warmth in the cool, cramped space. My hands itched to do something simple, anything that would break the tension, but I froze, aware that any movement might shatter the fragile balance between us. "I don't think this one's right," she muttered, flipping a page. Her voice was casual, but there was a slight tremor, an almost imperceptible hesitation that made me want to ask what she meant. She glanced at me, just for a second, and I saw it. Something unsaid, like she was on the edge of saying something she shouldn't. Before I could respond, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, paused, and I saw the name light up, someone from her past. "An ex, maybe." She sighed, and her shoulders slumped. I wanted to reach out, to ask if she was okay, but the moment passed, and she spoke again, voice careful and controlled. "It's nothing." We returned to sorting papers, but the quiet between us was heavier now. Every brush of her hand as she passed me a sheet, every accidental bump of knees under the table, made my heart stutter. I wanted to ask her to stay just a little longer, to let the moment stretch, but I couldn't. At one point, our hands hovered near each other, fingers almost touching over a stack of invoices. I didn't move, and neither did she. The air between us was thick, a mixture of curiosity and restraint. She laughed softly at something I said, and it sounded almost intimate, almost like she was letting me in on something private. I noticed the way her eyes lingered on me for a heartbeat too long, the subtle shift in her posture that made her lean just slightly closer. And for a moment, I thought we might, just might, cross that invisible line. But then, the storm outside rumbled, or maybe it was the sudden ring of her phone, pulling her attention away. She glanced at the caller ID again, then at me, and smiled, that same gentle, unreadable smile that always left me guessing. I swallowed hard, forcing my hand down from where it hovered near hers. My pulse thudded in my ears. We were so close, closer than I'd ever been to anyone like this. But the moment slipped past, unclaimed, suspended. I could feel the weight of what wasn't said pressing in, heavy and electrifying all at once. She straightened, a little too quickly, and said, "We should probably finish this tomorrow." Her tone was light, but her eyes, just for a fraction of a second, told me she knew what we were both thinking. I nodded, trying to appear casual, though my chest ached with restraint. And as I left the office, the echo of that almost touch lingered, a quiet, persistent spark I couldn't shake. We didn't speak for the first 10 minutes, which was longer than it should have been. I sat across from her at the small, cluttered table in the corner of the repair shop, the hum of fluorescent lights above us filling the space between words that didn't want to come. She was sipping her coffee, eyes unfocused, staring at some invisible point just beyond the room. I couldn't look away. Finally, she set the cup down with a soft clink. Her fingers lingered on the rim for a second longer than necessary, and I felt the faintest pull in my chest, like gravity had shifted. "What are we doing?" she said, quiet, almost fragile. The words weren't directed at me in accusation or question. They felt like they were reaching for something, a tether in the middle of uncertainty. I opened my mouth, closed it. I wanted to say something clever, reassuring, or maybe a joke to cut the tension, but the truth hovered too close. I swallowed. I don't know. She nodded slowly, like she had expected that answer. "I don't either." Her voice was calm, but the silence after it stretched taut, like the air itself was holding its breath. I wanted to reach across the table, touch her hand, let her know she wasn't alone. But something in her posture told me that any gesture right now might break the fragile honesty she had just given me. She wasn't asking for comfort. She was offering truth. And it was terrifying in its simplicity. Her eyes met mine, steady now, searching. Not judgmental, not flirtatious, just honest, vulnerable. There was a weight behind her gaze that made me feel exposed in ways I didn't know I could be. I noticed the subtle curve of her shoulders, the way her hair caught the harsh light above, the faint lines at the corners of her eyes that softened her expression but didn't hide the fatigue beneath. We sat in that stillness for what felt like hours, letting the silence speak. Every little sound, her breath, the faint drip of water from a leaky pipe, the scuff of my sneakers against the concrete floor, became amplified. I realized I had been holding mine, waiting for her to fill the emptiness with words, with explanations, with some sign that what was happening between us wasn't entirely forbidden. She finally leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I hate that this is complicated," she murmured. Her fingers played with the edge of the table, tapping lightly. "I hate that it feels like we're both waiting for something we can't even name." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I wanted to, but there was no safe way to untangle the truth from the consequences, the desire from the reality of our lives. She shook her head, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and whispered, "I think. I'm afraid of what it would mean if we stopped pretending." The room went quiet again. Only her voice remained, lingering in my mind, echoing over and over. I realized, in that moment, that nothing would ever feel normal again, because we had acknowledged it. We had named the unease, and that was enough to change everything. And as she turned to leave, I found myself thinking, almost without meaning to, I'm afraid of losing myself in what I feel for her. I found her in the back office, hunched over a small stack of papers that looked more like memories than invoices. The light from the single desk lamp fell across her face, softening the sharp edges of her jaw, highlighting the subtle tremor in her hands. She didn't notice me at first. "What's that?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice came out rougher than intended. She looked up, startled, and for a moment her eyes were unreadable. Then she sighed, leaning back, and pushed the papers toward me. "Old letters," she said quietly. "From someone I thought I'd never let myself miss." I glanced at the neat, handwritten pages, faded at the edges. "He?" I asked gently, trying not to pry. Her laugh was soft, bitter, and fleeting. "Yes, him. Or what he left behind." She looked away, voice catching just enough to tell me she was on the edge of something private, something fragile. I was young. Stupid. I thought I could fix things. I thought I could forgive myself before it was too late. But I couldn't. And now, her fingers traced a line across the inked words, lingering. "Now it's just me, trying to make sense of it. I didn't know what to say. The urge to reach for her hand was nearly irresistible, but I held back, letting her set the pace. Instead, I leaned on the desk, just close enough to notice the subtle changes in her expression, the twitch of her mouth, the small crease at the corner of her eye, the way her shoulders rounded in a mix of exhaustion and resignation. You remind me of him in ways I can't. I mean, it's not fair. You shouldn't be. Her voice faltered, a whisper almost lost in the room's quiet. She shook her head, as if trying to dismiss it. But the confession hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. I swallowed hard, heart picking up a rhythm I hadn't anticipated. I don't want to be him, I said carefully. I'm here, right now, and I want to understand, if you'll let me. She studied me, the shadows of her past flashing across her eyes, mixing with something that wasn't entirely grief. It was caution, fear, a guarded hope. Her lips parted slightly, as if she might say more, but the words didn't come. Instead, she reached for a photo lying next to the letters, a small, worn image of a man whose absence had shaped her quietly, irreversibly. For a moment, she just stared at it, and I could see her vulnerability laid bare, raw and unpolished. She didn't shield herself from the memory, didn't flinch from the weight it carried. And I realized, in that suspended second, how deeply her past had etched itself into the person she was now. The careful, strong, guarded woman who could still make my chest tighten with a glance. She looked up at me then, eyes glistening faintly, and whispered, I thought I had moved on. I thought I had, but seeing you here, seeing you, it's different. And I don't know if I can go back to pretending. I stayed silent, because nothing I said could untangle the past or erase the ache in her voice. I only nodded, feeling it in my chest. Something had shifted, quietly, irreversibly, between us. And when she finally let the photo fall back onto the desk, I realized I had been holding my breath the entire time. Because for the first time, she had let me glimpse what she carried, and it made everything feel terrifyingly possible. If you're ready, we can continue with prompt 6. Crossing the invisible. The repair shop was quiet in a way that made everything feel more intense, like the absence of sound was amplifying the things we didn't say. I was sitting across from her at the workbench, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fill the space with words. She was there, and that was enough. She reached for a small tool, and her hand brushed mine. It was accidental, and yet it wasn't. Neither of us moved away. The warmth of her fingers lingering against mine sent a shiver through me. Not startling, not desperate, just grounding. We worked side by side in silence, the kind that didn't need explanation. I noticed the little things, the faint smile she gave when a nut finally threaded correctly, the way her hair fell over her shoulder in an almost careless way, the gentle exhale she let out when she leaned back for a moment. I realized then how deeply I had been watching, learning, memorizing her gestures without even knowing it. I didn't know it would feel like this, she said quietly, voice low and almost hesitant. She didn't look at me directly, but I could feel her watching my reaction, as if testing whether I understood. Like what? I asked, though I already did. Like, inevitable, she murmured. Like maybe pretending isn't helping anyone. Her eyes lifted just a fraction, enough to meet mine for a heartbeat. That glance carried all the tension, all the unspoken confessions, all the quiet admissions we had skirted around for weeks. I let my hand hover near hers, giving her the choice without saying a word. She leaned in slightly, the slightest tilt of her shoulder, and I felt the shift. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just real. Two people finally accepting that the space between them had always been a misdirection, and that being near each other was no longer optional. Her fingers brushed mine again, this time deliberate. I didn't pull back. The warmth was steady, comforting, and it said everything words hadn't yet dared to speak. There was no rush, no urgency, just the slow recognition that we had arrived somewhere we had been circling for a long time. She tilted her head, resting briefly against the edge of the workbench, eyes half closed. I exhaled softly and moved closer, letting my forehead graze hers. The touch was fleeting, unannounced, but it sealed the moment. An understanding, a quiet acknowledgement, a truce with all the tension and hesitation that had preceded it. We didn't say, "I love you." We didn't need to. There was no dramatic declaration, no sudden shift in the world outside. Only this, the subtle alignment of two lives, quietly intersecting in a way that felt earned, human, and real. I settled back slightly, our hands still touching, and allowed myself to finally breathe. She mirrored me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of calm. Not relief, not triumph, just a quiet finality. Outside, the world continued, indifferent and loud. But in that small, cluttered repair shop, we had found something rare, a shared understanding, an inevitable closeness, a gentle permission to simply be together. And that, I realized, was enough. I think about that night a lot. How quiet it was, how little we said, and yet how much was understood. Sitting here now, months later, I can still feel the subtle pulse of that moment, the way it settled between us like something inevitable. It wasn't a movie moment, no grand gestures or perfect lines, just two people finally letting themselves exist near each other without pretense. She's changed me, though I wouldn't have noticed at first. It's not dramatic, it's in the little ways. I notice details now. How someone smiles across a table, how a hand can linger too long, how a quiet space can speak louder than 1,000 words. I've learned patience, observation, restraint, and the subtle courage it takes to let yourself be seen. And her, she's lighter in a way I hadn't expected. There's still depth, still shadows from the past she carries, but she's allowed herself to relax in ways that are tangible. She laughs more freely. Her gaze doesn't flicker away when someone looks too long, and I see her make space for joy, for connection, for something uncertain and real. I like thinking that maybe I helped her, or maybe she helped me. It doesn't matter who did what. What matters is that we showed up for each other when the world didn't make it easy. Love, I've learned, isn't always about the fireworks or the climactic confession. Sometimes it's about leaning into the quiet, noticing the small signs, and choosing each other again and again without needing to announce it. It's in the brush of fingers, the shared cup of coffee, the understanding glance across a cluttered workbench. It's messy, slow, tentative, and real. I can't imagine going back to the way things were before, and I don't want to. That tension, that hesitancy, that slow burn longing, it shaped the closeness we now share. It made the eventual ease between us feel earned, permanent in a way that sudden infatuation never could. And so, when I think of her now, I see more than the woman I once only observed from a cautious distance. I see someone who has always been layered, confident, complicated, and utterly human. Someone whose presence is both a challenge and a comfort. And I see myself, finally able to meet that presence, quietly, without rush, without fear. We don't need dramatic finales or declarations. We have this, the steady warmth of shared space, the subtle understanding that we can be ourselves with each other, and the knowledge that, in each other, we've found something rare and worth keeping. So, for anyone watching this story, maybe that's the point. Love isn't always loud, but it can be persistent, gentle, and quietly transformative. And sometimes, the moments you almost miss, the accidental brush of a hand, the glance that lingers too long, are the ones that change everything. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?